During the Second World War, one of the most influential people within Germany was Heinrich Himmler. Himmler rose to the position of the Reichsführer SS, leading the feared and notorious SS, who were involved in military matters, as well as administering and guarding the concentration camps. However, the man referred to in the Soviet Union by Joseph Stalin as my Himmler was Lavrentiy Beria. Beria was the longest-lived and most influential of Stalin's chief of secret police, and he had a huge amount of power during the Second World War. He was responsible for a number of purges and atrocities during the conflict, and like Himmler was responsible also for a system of camps known as Gulags, and was also in charge of overseeing punishment and executions. So join us today as we look at the brutal execution of Lavrentiy Beria, Stalin's Heinrich Himmler, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Lavrentiy Beria came from humble beginnings, his mother being very religious and his father being a landowner. However, he rose to become one of the most evil and influential parts of Stalin's government. Beria allegedly joined the Bolsheviks in March 1917, but in 1920 was working in Azerbaijan. The Red Army in late 1920 had captured the city of Baku where Beria was staying, but he managed to escape execution as there was not enough time to arrange his death. He was imprisoned but later had a career in state security, and by 1922 he became the deputy head of the Georgian branch of the OGPU, an intelligence service. In 1924 he was involved in suppressing a nationalistic uprising in Georgia, and 10,000 people were executed because of his actions. This helped Beria's reputation as a feared individual and one not to be crossed. He was a close ally of Stalin and helped his rise to power, and he was involved in destroying Turkish and Iranian intelligence networks and spies in the Caucasus. In 1931 he was appointed to the position of the first secretary of the Communist Party of Georgia and became a member of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union 3 years later. He began to attack other members and ordered executions to gain favour in Stalin's eyes, and he caught his attention after faking conspiracy. Beria told Stalin that he had personally stopped an assassination attempt on him, and with this he became very trusted. He was involved in a number of Stalin's purges, running them and executing a huge number of people. Beria was very loyal to Stalin and was willing to crush anyone who wasn't loyal to him and the cause of communism. But it was the head of the NKVD that Beria is mostly remembered. He initially started as a deputy in August 1938, however later became the head himself. Nikolai Yevtsov had initially been chosen as the leader of the Soviet secret police, but it was claimed that he was strangled by Lavrentiy Beria himself. Beria then purged the NKVD, ensuring that those in positions of power were loyal to him and not Yevtsov. In the 1930s, Beria was responsible for a number of purges, sending thousands of politicians, writers, scientists and even peasants to prison, to be tortured barbarically or sent straight to a shooting range to be executed. It was said that, in these days everyone lived in fear. Everyone expected that at any moment there would be a knock on the door in the middle of the night that would prove fatal. Beria instilled a reign of terror onto the people of the Soviet Union and wished to mercilessly crush any dissenters. For decades he had been involved in murders and killings, and was the main force behind the creation and expansion of a huge network of forced labour camps across Soviet territory, known as the Gulags. There were over 500 camps set up, and these saw horrific treatment and punishment inside of them. Many sent to the Gulags would be killed by the conditions, and it was said by a former prisoner. The Gulags existed before Beria, but he was the one who built them on a mass scale, industrialising them. Human life had no value for him. Stalin knew what a brutal man he was, referring to him, as mentioned earlier in a conference with President Roosevelt, as our Himmler, comparing Beria to the man who oversaw the Holocaust, the SS, and the mass murder of millions during the Second World War. As World War II hit the Soviet Union, Beria was an integral part of Stalin's policies and treatment of his own people. An agreement had been drawn up known as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact between the Soviets and Nazi Germany that stated that Poland would be carved up between the two nations after it was invaded. Stalin would send his forces in from the east to take Poland after Hitler sent his in, and the Russian Red Army were ruthless and brutal. The remaining Polish army was rounded up and sent to camps. However, one event Beria would be remembered for in infamy was the Katyn Massacre. This was a series of executions by the Soviet Union, where 22,000 members of the Polish military, as well as other civilians such as doctors and priests, were executed en masse. Beria proposed to Stalin that all captive members of the Polish officer corps should be killed, and Stalin approved this. It was Beria who sanctioned this, and this was a huge criminal act which was only discovered when the mass graves were located. There was a cover-up of the massacre arranged by the NKVD, but Beria continued his reign of terror. In 1941 he arranged a huge purge of the Red Army this time, in which 500 of his own NKVD agents and operatives were executed, along with 30,000 members of the Red Army. Executing your own soldiers at this time wasn't the most clever move for the Soviet Union, as the Nazis would break their non-aggression pact and invade the Soviet Union during Operation Barbarossa, which saw huge losses initially for the Red Army. The purges were talked about by officers, and they came up with a euphemism for this, having a coffee with Beria, and he was known as Stalin's most wicked henchman. He actively was involved in mass murders, but he was also known for committing rape on the streets of Moscow, prowling the streets in his car, looking for women to assault. He was a terrible and brutal man, and today many of his true crimes are still classified in Soviet archives. Inside of the military, he became the Marshal of the Soviet Union, the highest rank, and had also been involved in overseeing the Soviet attempts to build an atomic bomb, forcing workers from the Gulags to work in uranium mines. However, after the war, it was with the downfall of Stalin that Beria's also came. Stalin was approaching 70, and there was a struggle for power and a debate as to who would succeed him after he died. Beria resigned from being the NKVD's chief in January 1946, but was still in control as Deputy Prime Minister, but with Stalin's death, things all changed. In March 1953, Stalin died from a cerebral hemorrhage, and some men pointed the finger at Beria, accusing him of poisoning the former leader. Beria was allegedly mocking Stalin as he died from his illness, but when Stalin died, there was a deadly race for the top job in the Soviet Union. Beria seemed in a great position. For years he'd been the chief of the NKVD, and had been keeping tabs and eyes on his rivals, creating a dossier of dirt on them, and this meant he could manipulate any of the men, but this didn't actually play out. With Stalin dead, Beria sought to come to an agreement with an old ally, Georgy Malenkov, and became powerful as in control of the Ministry of State Security and Internal Affairs, which placed him in control of the secret and normal police, and also gave him a small private army. He began to talk about the easing of Stalin's policies, and many feared Beria as much as Stalin, and they believed he would make a power play. However, Beria's own downfall was orchestrated by Nikita Khrushchev, the secretary of the party's Central Committee, who quietly and discreetly secured the support of other powerful figures in the government, including Malenkov and other army generals. Khrushchev organised a meeting launching an attack on Beria, and Beria, taken aback, was confused by what was happening, and Khrushchev accused him of being in league with the British, being paid off by the British intelligence services, and said he was no true communist. Khrushchev then said soon that Beria would meet his death. A motion was put in to dismiss Beria from his position, and he soon realised what was happening. From behind his desk, Malenkov, his former ally, turned against him, pressing a button below his desk, and this was a signal for Georgy Zhukov to order a group of armed soldiers into the room and to seize and arrest Beria. Beria's men were guarding the Kremlin at the time, and he was imprisoned there in a small cell until nightfall, when he was then smuggled out in the boot of a car. He was taken to a Moscow guardhouse and then to the bunker of the Moscow military district's headquarters. Action was taken to prevent Beria from being seized and secured, and he was tried by a special session of the Supreme Court of the Soviet Union on the 23rd of December 1953. He had no defence counsel and no right to appeal, and it was obvious what would happen. He was accused of treason, allegedly trying to negotiate peace with Hitler during World War II, accused of terrorism in regards to the purge of the army in 1941, and counter-revolutionary actions during the Russian Civil War. Along with 6 other defendants, Beria was tried and was sentenced to death. The 6 others were then dragged out of the courtroom and were shot straight away, but Beria was not. He was separated from the others and was dragged kicking and screaming. He knew his death was about to come, and surrounded by other Soviet officials, he knew that his time was coming to an end. The man who was compared to Himmler, and the one who had the blood of thousands on his hands was screaming and crying in his final moments. He was on his knees, collapsing in tears, begging for mercy and begging to be spared. He was then shot through the head by Pavel Batitsky, who had been selected to perform the execution. He was then cremated, but there was some belief by others that it was a body double who stood trial, and that Beria had been executed months before he was supposedly shot dead on the 23rd of December 1953 at the age of 54. So Lavrentiy Beria was a brutal and savage man who met his end begging for his life whilst a gun was pointed at his head. He was known as the horrific chief of the NKVD and the man who carried out Stalin's purges with brutality and efficiency. After his death, more rumours emerged about his life, and it was claimed that he was also a serial killer and was known for abducting girls off the street, abusing them and murdering them. Some were allegedly even buried in his wife's rose garden, and it was said he had a torture chamber in the basement of his home in Moscow, and that there was probably an underground passage leading to a number of burial sites of these young women. Allegedly this was even known by the US too. However, Lavrentiy Beria was executed following power plays by other politicians in the wake of the death of Stalin. He really should have seen what was coming, but in a different world he could have very easily been the man who succeeded Stalin as the man at the top of the Soviet Union. It's clear that his brutal ways and leadership over the NKVD could have secured him the top job. However, things weren't to be for the evil and brutal man Stalin referred to as my Himmler. Once again, thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.